Here we are. Okay, we are one or more platforms dropped, it says here on my. We may not be going to LinkedIn. Yes. All right, we're not on LinkedIn today, FYI, but we are on YouTube. All right. Get rid of this. All right, here we go. That's annoying, but oh well. Here we go. Good morning, podcasters. Today is Tuesday, July 14th, 2026, and today, podcast sponsorships, finding the right sponsor, and why audience trust matters more than download numbers. Sponsorship strategist Losh shares a practical process any podcaster can start using today. So if you're listening live on Clubhouse, hit the share button, top right-hand side of the screen. Share it however Clubhouse lets you. And if you're catching us via podcast, YouTube, etc., please share this episode with a fellow podcaster. And now give us about 30 seconds and we'll get things rolling. Thanks for being here. The Podcasting Morning Show is powered by Ironic Media, helping podcasters launch, polish, and grow great shows. And by Content Creators Accountant, helping creators build real business behind their content. Good morning again, Podcasting Morning Show. Thank you so much for being here. I am your host, Mark Ronick, and currently on stage with me, my co-hosts, DR Fay, Ralph Estep, BC Babbles, Sid Meadows. We have Dan from our audience as well, and of course, our guest, who we will officially introduce to you momentarily. And you may have heard me giggle during the intro because we sat here and asked Losh how to pronounce her last name, and I said it probably 10 times in a row, and then when it came time to do it, I know I butchered it. So please forgive me, Losh. Can you please pronounce your name, and then we will officially introduce you.
Hi, everyone. It's Losh Mudley.
Mudley. Yes. See, I said that 10
Mudley,
times.
yes.
Mudley. Okay. And Losh from South Africa as well. And just a little note for everybody. Tomorrow we are back doing our news and comment. Just wanted to remind you at the top of the show, we will talk about some big headlines coming around the world of podcasting. Definitely one to check out tomorrow. But with that, let me hand it over to Ralph. Let me let him finish sipping his tea, and then hand it over to Ralph to officially introduce our guest. Go ahead, Ralph. Good morning.
Well, thank you, Mark, and good morning, everybody. So if you've ever thought about finding sponsors for your podcast, you might have quickly run into a bigger question. Where do I even begin? Do you need thousands of downloads? Who should you contact? What should you say? And how do you approach a company without sounding like every other person asking them for money? Our guest today, Losh Mudley, has a practical process for finding aligned companies, building relationships, and starting those conversations. Losh has spent more than 15 years at the intersection of entertainment, retail, and sport, and has advised over 550 brands and businesses on how to build real sponsorship partnerships. She's a sponsorship strategist at Sponsored, and she just published a piece for the podcast host, laying out a simple, repeatable process for any independent podcaster that you can use to land your first sponsor. So, Losh, welcome to the Podcasting Morning Show. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Ralph. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to chat on this topic because, so many people don't really know where to start. So when I was working on the article for the podcast host, we just thought that the initial conversation and guiding people through that initial phase is actually the most important thing to touch on, and to have a process that can guide podcasters through this, because everybody online seems to be so confused. They don't know where to start. And by just simply having this process and guiding people through, I'd like to hope that everybody can reach their first sponsors. within the next month or 2 months or so.
All right, Losh. Well, for someone meeting you for the first time, what do you help creators and businesses do through those sponsorships that you're talking about?
Ralph, I help independent podcasters build sponsorship revenue through direct brand partnerships. Over the last 6 years, I've specialized in sponsorship strategy. And so I basically work with creators who have already built meaningful audiences, but remain commercially constrained by a CPM model that's been built around selling minutes and not relationships. And what I noticed is that a lot of creators are trapped by a pricing model that has been designed for mass market reach.
Yeah,
And
it's not to interrupt you, but it's something I talk about on the show here all the time. It's almost that race for the bottom when you look at that CPM model. Now, you and I have talked a little bit on LinkedIn about this, and I know you were on Pod News talking about it as well. Do you think that's a trap for a lot of independent podcasters because they feel like they've got to have this certain number of downloads, but then they don't get to that?
yes, I feel that the industry pushes downloads, and a lot of podcasters are stuck on downloads before contacting sponsors. However, there's so many niche podcasts that can make meaningful sponsorship revenue and build sustainable businesses if they do go directly to sponsors, perhaps contacting local sponsors, for example, as opposed to the CPM model, which I think a lot of creators feel that this is the only option available for them, and they're not too sure how to package their creative assets. So that's a lot of the work that I do. I pretty much help creators with the commercial strategy, how to position their audience, how to price their audience and monetization models. And then how to build sponsorship pipelines, develop those opportunities, and secure aligned brand partnerships. Because I do feel over and above download numbers, there's also the discussion about alignment. If you can find a brand that is completely aligned to your audience, then you can demand prices that are way above CPM rates. And another thing I'm really interested in is branded experiences, live events, things like that, because I think the industry is at a really pivotal moment where things are evolving, and there's so much more that you can do these days. But a lot of it requires pitching to brands direct.
That makes sense. What specific, my ears perked up when you said events, being somebody who plans a yearly event, soon to be probably more than one event per year. So what specifically, when you say I don't know if this was your exact words, but you're attracted to events in this space as well. What did you mean by that?
I think it's really important for podcasters to move into the real world and to design events and experience, to take the podcast into the real world, to design events and experiences where the community can come together, and to bring sponsors along the journey as well.
I like that.
And so think of things like once in a lifetime experiences, or these experiential moments that brands can create that's over and above just a host read.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what you're saying is along the lines of why we created the Empowered Podcasting Conference. It was an extension of this very community, the community clamoring for some kind of in-person get-together, and we eventually evolved into this idea of a conference, and a lot of these community members come and help run the event as well, speak at the event, are a very big part of it. So you're speaking my language for sure. DR, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah. So my trigger word that you had mentioned is local sponsors. What do I say to that client? Because I'm a podcast producer. What do I say to that client when I say local sponsors to them, and they say, but my podcast, it goes to, Great Britain, it goes to all of America, it goes to here. So what do I say to them of how valuable a local sponsorship is? And is it a certain kind of podcast, a certain kind of something that only a local sponsor would make sense, or is it any show?
Great question. I think so many podcasters overlook local sponsors, firstly. And I really think that, firstly, it depends on the podcast and the audience that you are reaching. I think it all depends on the connection between the brand and your audience. And so you have to, as the producer, sit down and think, what's the best product that can add value to my audience's lifestyle? What do they already use and things like that? And from that, you can then look into any local sponsors that could fit your audience, as well as digital sponsors. I think at any moment in time, you should have both running parallel, regardless. And by local, I mean, within your community, but also on a national level. Because I find often when I work with creators, their first point of thought when it comes to sponsors is all of the big guys. And the big guys, they're so bombarded with emails from absolutely everyone across, not only podcasts, but absolutely every single category, from athletes to musicians and so forth. But it all comes down to relationships and having both running at the same time, your local guys and anything online that makes sense for your audience.
And
Go ahead.
how many ads are too many? I mean, there's
I'm going to actually cut you off for a second, DR, because I don't want you to jump too far ahead here.
Okay. Sorry.
But no, it's an excellent question. I think I know where you're going with it. So please pin that up here, because I think that's going to be an important question. Ralph, I know you had another question. I do. I know BC does as well. So take it away, Ralph, and then we'll keep things moving.
Great. So besides CPM, what do you think most podcasters misunderstand about how those partnerships begin in the first place? Because I think that's a place where there's a big disconnect. I know when you wrote your article for the Pod News, you talked about how most of the money in sponsorship is going to the very small amount of folks. But what do you think the independent do-it-yourself podcasters missing in those partnerships, and how they create those in the first place?
Could you just repeat the last bit, Ralph?
Yeah, what I'm basically
The last part of the
asking
question?
is, so many independent podcasters get stuck on CPM. What do you think they misunderstand most about how those sponsorship partnerships actually begin, how they create those?
I think what they misunderstand is that it starts with conversation. And it starts with conversation and alignment and building a relationship. And I think that's the difference between CPM models, which pretty much monetize, time, and podcast hosts, which monetize relationships. Because after all, podcasting is one of the most trusted mediums that have ever existed. So why wouldn't a creator want to monetize trust and relationships? And I think CPM models aren't the best way to do that. And so because a lot of podcasters think that this is the only option, I think that's where things get a little bit misunderstood.
I would agree with you. And do you think in a lot of cases it's that podcasters don't even know to ask the question? They don't understand how to build those relationships. Don't you think that's where it really starts, is they don't understand the trust they're bringing. They don't understand the problem that their audience is having. So that's where the disconnect starts.
Totally. I totally agree with you. They don't really know how much value that they are bringing to the table and what their audience means for a sponsor. And a lot of podcasters don't actually understand the sponsorship process. They're great with getting their show out there, and there's a lot of emphasis, as we said, on downloads, and there's a lot of emphasis on growing your audience. But when it comes to monetization, it seems to be one of the biggest challenges after growing an audience. the kind of the concept of making money from your podcast. And I recently looked at, it was the 2025 Independent Podcaster Report, and they surveyed about 550 indie podcasters on their growth struggles, monetization, how they use video and AI. And actually, surprisingly, 85% of the surveyed creators said that they're not making money, and that monetizing their audience seems to be one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, that's funny. I was actually just going to jump into that article, mention that article to you. So great segue there. And I want to ask you a little bit about this. So how can a podcaster tell whether a sponsorship is a realistic fit for their show, for their goals, et cetera? Because there are lots of potential sponsors out there, and we can find them in a various amount of ways, but how do we know if it's actually a realistic fit?
I think you have to know your audience really well. And if you know your audience really well, you'll know what products naturally integrate into their lifestyles. And from that point of reference, you can easily create a list. In terms of categories, right? And so I think another thing that creators struggle with is they think that contacting 10 sponsors is a lot and it's going to do the job. But actually, what you need to do is contact 50 to 100 sponsors. And I think that will give you enough coverage. And from 50 to 100, you might only get one deal closed. And I think a lot of sponsors don't realize how wide they need to cast the net. So the net needs to be cast really wide. And then at the same time, you need to look at local sponsors, digital sponsors, and the rest. And another thing I speak about in the recent article for the podcast host is that, there is native industry sponsors. And so those are products and brands that are directly connected to the content or the category of your podcast, right? So, if you're speaking to marathon runners, think running shoes and running apparel. And then there's aligned industries, and these aren't necessarily the same category, but they serve the same audience. They have the same lifestyle aspirations, and there's a very strong audience overlap. So when you are going ahead with making a list, you need to think across both, native industry sponsors as well as products that aren't directly associated to your audience, but are really well aligned in terms of their lifestyle.
Okay, I have to ask you, there's something that you said that I think is important to at least highlight here for a second. You just mentioned it's not 10 sponsors that we should be reaching out to. It's more like 50 to 100. That feels like a lot. When I hear that, that feels like a lot. So what would you tell a podcaster who you say that to and they balk at that number?
Well, I think, okay, so firstly, we have AI now. And I've got a great prompt in the article that you can kind of use, and AI will spit out 50 to 100 sponsors when using the prompt. So I think you don't have to do all the heavy lifting anymore in terms of it does sound like a large number, but once you start working through everything and once you start breaking it up, for example, you could look at 1 week where you are reaching out to 10 sponsors, or you're finding 10. The marketing managers and so forth of 10, and that's your work for the rest of the week. And so that's 50 done, and that's going to be over the next 2 weeks, you're going to gather all of the information around these potential 100 sponsors. So I think it does seem like a large number, but it has to be broken up into little bits, and once that's done, you can kind of get ahead of it.
Yeah, and I'm sure, I don't even know what the most recent numbers are, but I know when it comes to sales, it's something like one or two in every 10, you might get your foot through the door, right? So I can understand what you're saying when we talk about 50 to 100, we're increasing the odds, or at least we're increasing our chances to land that sponsor. So I get that. And this is why a lot of podcasters, I think, start to get frustrated with the process because they think it's just easy money. But you gotta, as we say here, you gotta treat it like a business. It's not some magic pill that's gonna all of a sudden make you rich. You got to work for it just like you would if you were starting a business. Starting a podcast is no different in my opinion. Let's see here. BC, you had a question earlier. Did you want to ask something?
Yes, sir. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well.
Morning.
One of the terms you used earlier that I've been kind of locked onto was alignment. And in my own little kind of corner of the world, I talk a lot about entrepreneurship and how shifts in the market are propelling brands to adjust in certain ways. And I'm finding a lot is that one of the commodities brands should be kind of focusing on in general is developing understandability and credibility, namely how well is it understood what they offer, and then how well are they known to actually provide that same thing. And I'm curious to know your point of view on whether or not you think podcasters should feel compelled to develop and leverage the same kind of commodity when it comes to acquiring a sponsorship.
Could you just rephrase that? Sorry, there were.
Yeah, sorry, I'm a little long-winded. So one of the biggest commodities in today's business is just how well it's understood what you offer and how well you're known to provide that same thing. So when it comes to podcasting, do you think podcasters should make sure they have the same level of understandability and credibility to their brand when it comes to leveraging sponsors?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think as much as a sponsor can understand your audience and see why they are so aligned to the sponsor's product and offering, it makes their job of saying yes so much easier, and it's going to make the entire process a lot simpler. And that comes down to the podcaster just, knowing their audience so well in terms of their lifestyle and their behavior and things like that. So the podcaster almost has to be a marketer in a sense in terms of, consumer behavior and things like that.
Ralph,
Awesome. Thank you so much.
go for it.
Losh, I know we talked about that 85% number, and that doesn't shock me. Being the content creators accountant, I hear this all the time. And I think one of the big obstacles is, especially independent podcasters don't understand how to know when they have enough value, how they've gotten to a point where there's enough value in their audience to begin approaching potential sponsors. How do you tell them here's the point that you have to be at? We talked about for CPM, you've got to have thousands and thousands of downloads. Everybody understands that, check the box. But when it comes to sponsorship, there still has to be value, correct? How do you work with people at that level, the do-it-yourselfer, the independent, who 85% are locked out of this? How do you get them to that point of saying, yes, there is value in this, and let me show you how to show that to the sponsors?
I think if we look at CPM, we look at, traditionally we've looked at download numbers, and then it comes into the thousands, and we're looking at mass scale. But the difference is when you have a niche podcaster who perhaps has, let's say, 250, an audience of, 250 loyal subscribers, listeners, viewers, and they're decision makers in big companies, and you're able to communicate that, and you're able to show the demographics behind your audience, and the sponsor's able to understand the value of who these people are in terms of their pipeline, their sales pipeline, then I think, as long as you're able to show value in terms of potential sales. Another thing I think that a lot of podcasters miss is things like case studies. If you've been fortunate enough to have a sponsor and it's gone really well and it's moved a lot of product for a particular sponsor, if you're able to communicate what that did for the sponsor in terms of sales and brand awareness, then I think you're good to go, and you're able to communicate that your audience does take action, and they do view sponsors on the show positively.
Losh, I want to follow up with something because I'm getting ready to record a show for my content creators account, and I'm going to make a statement. I want to know how you feel about this. I think it's one thing to say that you have a small niche audience. It's another thing to say, is that audience just tire kickers, people who are just coming to listen, but they're never going to act on anything? And I think that that's where a lot of folks can get lost in this whole sponsorship trap, is you've got to be, because you use the word, you said, these are people who are decision makers. These are people who are action takers. And do you agree with me that I think that's where we need to really be focused, is do we have an audience of action takers?
Yes, 100%. Do you have an audience of people who trust you and value your opinion, and because of the content that you're putting out, will do certain things because of that loyalty? So it's all about trust, it's all about action, it's all about the relationship, and I think that's how you value your audience. And so that's kind of, it works more for your niche guys. When you have a mass audience of 1 million listeners, their engagement levels are really, really low. So I think it comes down to how engaged is your niche audience.
I love that. Yeah. And I'm curious what information about an audience matters to a sponsor beyond those download numbers, because we talk a lot about this, and we're starting to already today, this idea that the download numbers are just a little piece of this puzzle, right? But one thing I don't think we here talk about enough that I would love for you to add to here is, again, what I'm saying, what is important beyond those download numbers?
I think I just touched on it, and that's the engagement rates.
Okay.
How engaged is your audience? And then also, what are their interests? You should be able to kind of map out their general interests. And so if you put those two things together, interest and engagement, I think you can build a greater narrative around your audience. And I think that's ultimately what you're selling sponsors. You're selling a narrative about your audience, and you should know your audience well enough to know that they are going to follow through on things. If you do have a real world event, they are going to show up for you because they are part of this community, or you know what they value. I think we also have to look into things like values, that kind of values, interests.
Yeah, that makes sense. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. No, it's all of those things, the qualitative things, as opposed to the quantitative, can add a lot more value in terms of narrative when you are speaking to sponsors. How do you paint the picture?
Yeah, well, and how do you paint the picture? How can a smaller podcast clearly demonstrate the quality, the relevance, and the trust and that engagement piece that you're talking about within its audience? How do we demonstrate that?
I think at the back end of a lot of social platforms, you do have your engagement rates. So I highly advise creators to always add in the engagement rates if it is really good. And then to also look at within your industry, to look at the average engagement rate. So if you're in tourism, what is the average engagement rate in the tourism industry? And you're able to show that. I think if you have a mailing list and things like that, engagement and open rates come in handy as well. So as much information that you can show the sponsor, not just the superficial metrics where I think a lot of creators kind of get stuck to say, I have 1 million views. But let's look at engagement, let's look at things like open rates, and let's try and expand the podcast offering into more real world places so that sponsors can, and then you can invite a sponsor over to actually meet and see the audience, as well as case studies. Case studies are so important. If you have worked with a brand, always get information whether it has moved the needle when it came to things like leads and product purchases, because you can use that over and over and over when you are selling to sponsors.
DR, go ahead. You had a question.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's say I'm searching for sponsors. Is this an email? Do I send them that media deck? Is that what it's called? A media deck or a media package? And what goes into that package that the sponsors can see?
I think that the traditional way about it is getting the sponsor's email, putting the media pack together, and pretty much pitching your podcast. But in this article for the podcast host, I've looked at how people struggle with cold outreach, and that it's a lot harder for your smaller niche creators. It might actually be the hardest part of the whole journey, actually. And what I have suggested is to get a foot in the door, try and build a relationship with a sponsor, whether it's online, on LinkedIn, or if it's a local sponsor in real life, without asking for money upfront yet and sharing all of those stats yet. So another suggestion would be putting together, a 60-second audio sample that shows what you're all about, and then kind of saying, I do have a short clip of the podcast, can I send it over and get your opinion? Or invite the sponsor onto the show, things like that. So before you go ahead and ask for money and present all of the numbers, to warm up your sponsor a bit more could actually be a lot more beneficial.
So respond to maybe some of their posts that they're doing in social media, maybe ask them some questions in a post, just try and get that exchange going with them.
Yes, 100%. Even if you share a story beforehand about how their product or their service helped you solve a problem.
Oh, good. Okay.
And you come to the party with all of those things, kind of unsolicited, I think it will be a much warmer and an easier sale.
Okay.
Down the road.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Take it away, Ralph.
So, Losh, you and I met because I reached out to you on LinkedIn, actually. So I did exactly what you just mentioned. It's all about building relationships. And I think that's the key to all of this, actually, is building those one-on-one relationships. But as I'm thinking about doing that, and I'm thinking about building 50 to 100 potential companies, if I'm the podcaster, what makes a company a strong prospect for a particular podcast? What am I actually looking for? I know I can go out there and build a ton of relationships with people one-on-one, but what am I actually looking for in that potential sponsor so that I'm not wasting my time chasing after ones who aren't going to do anything?
Great question, Ralph. I think that you should do a little bit of research beforehand, and you ideally want a sponsor who has a marketing budget. So when you go onto social media and the rest, I think you need to do a little bit of an investigation and see, are they spending money on anything? Do they have any sweepstakes running? Do they have any partnerships? What are they doing from a marketing perspective? And so you'll be able to kind of grasp, do they have a budget or not? Or is everything just, pretty much organic? Also look into press releases, and you'll be able to see what their activity has been on the market. And I think it can give you an indication. Their marketing actions can give you an indication in terms of budget, because ultimately, to get a sponsor, they need to have the budget.
How do we
I think what I
find
hear you
those
saying
press
is they're not,
releases?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you,
I'm
but
sorry.
I think what I hear you saying is there's no easy button to this. You got to do your homework and you got to go look for
Yeah.
people who are actually willing to spend money. And I think that's a disconnect for a lot of people. They just assume, well, there's this particular business. They seem like they're doing great. They must have a marketing budget, but not all people do, correct? Is that where you're going with that?
Yes, that's exactly where I'm going with it. So you do need to do a lot of homework to kind of understand, and before you do that pitch, to look at your most likely chances, I think. And a lot of sponsors don't quite do that. A lot of podcasters don't do that.
Losh, how do we find, because you mentioned press releases, look for the press releases. How do we find those?
Usually I just go onto AI, and you can pretty much ask for their marketing strategy, any press release that has been released over the last 6 months or a year.
Oh,
When
okay.
you are doing research on a company.
Okay,
So with
thank you.
AI now, it can pull all of that for you.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I know that I've been using AI lately. Some of these, so like one of the features ChatGPT has, and I know Claude does similar things too. This scheduling feature where you can actually tell ChatGPT, I want you to do something 1 week from now. And what I'm doing, like just to give you an idea, this reminds me of what Losh is explaining. Like for the news, when we're preparing for news, I now have ChatGPT every Monday morning pulling all relevant stories for our show that we could talk about during our news episodes. So you could do a very similar thing there with, if you're looking for particular press releases from your potential sponsors, you could easily set that up. You don't need one of the nice things about it is I didn't write a fancy prompt to create it. I just went in there and told it what I was looking to do, and it helped me put this prompt together and create this scheduled weekly emails. So it's really cool. Now, I think Ralph, you had to. Oh no, Ralph. Yeah, you said you saw something Sambaza asked on
Yeah, I want
YouTube.
to. Yeah, Sambaza put this in our YouTube chat. He said, do mock video ads or pitch video ads of the intended sponsor help in leveraging your podcast to sponsors? So I think what he's asking you is, do you see the value in creating like a mock-up and then sending it to a sponsor of this is what I could do for you if you were to sponsor my program?
Yes, definitely. I think mock-ups can always help the sponsor imagine what this could be like. So I definitely think that could assist. I know in event pictures, for example, in terms of branding, um, you know, you always send a mock-up in terms of what all of the branding will look like. So it would pretty much be the same thing. Mock-ups can add value.
Gabe from Clubhouse had a question, and his is there a tool or a way to make or construct contracts to bring on sponsorships for your podcast business, especially if you're new to finding sponsors?
Oh, what was that, Adir? Is there a tool that can help you with the
Is there a
contract?
tool or a way to make or construct contracts to bring on sponsorships for your podcast business, especially if you're new to finding sponsors? This
So,
sounds like another AI will solve that kind of thing.
Yeah.
is that what you
Yeah, I
use? What
think
do you use specifically, Losh?
I think once you've packaged your creative assets and you know what is going to sell or has been sold, and then you can pretty much move that into AI in terms of the contract,
Okay, that makes
or
sense.
a memorandum of understanding at least between
So
both parties.
let's talk a little bit about this search for sponsors. What signs suggest that a company belongs on your list of potential sponsors, and what signs suggest maybe that they shouldn't be on that list?
Signs that they should not be on the list. Let's look into that. I think, obviously, if they have no marketing activity, if you think they're a match but they've had no marketing activity at all on social media, then perhaps they won't be interested at all. But if you see that they're an active company, they're constantly promoting some type of product, then I think they definitely should be on your list. I think you also need to think in terms of the brand's perspective, like what is their strategy, you know? Do they usually work with podcasts, or are they some, you know, some brands are really focused on musicians, for example, or you know, perhaps they only work with major sporting events. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yep, that makes sense. Go ahead, Ralph.
Yeah, I know we've talked a lot about AI, and in a lot of ways, I think AI can be that easy button for a lot of people. You know, just drop it into AI and it's going to give us our answers. So, what information should we be feeding into AI? Because AI is just a tool. What are the things that we should be feeding into AI to generate useful sponsor prospects? You know, you said you put some ideas in this article that you wrote, but what are some, because, you know, as way I look at AI is it's only as good as the prompt you put into it. Have you thought about
Yes.
that? Is there some things that you recommend adding
Yep.
to that?
So in the article, what I've actually done is I've written out a prompt that will give you both local and you know, digital sponsors. And so perhaps we can add a link to that article, and you know, anybody can kind of copy and paste the prompt and then just fill in their specific information when they are using AI to generate the list of 50 to 100 sponsors. So I've created the prompt already.
But are there some things in that prompt that we can talk about right now that you put in there because the intentionality is I better make sure I put this in there? I know we're going to share the prompt. I think it's a great point. But what are some of the pitfalls that you've kind of factored into that prompt?
I think, you know, you need to be clear about your audience. Of course, you need to be clear about your location, and you know, so I've tried to put as much information of that into the prompt as possible. So I've kind of created the boundaries, and then you'll just insert like audience details, location, and the rest.
All right. So once you've gotten that list, now I'm just picturing that I'm an independent podcaster. I'm one of the 85% that have never done this. So I'm taking your advice, Losh. I'm making that list. I've got 100 people. What is the absolute next thing I do once I have that list? What's the first activity that I can do to start to move that needle starting today?
I think firstly, the list can be a bit overwhelming. So I think the first thing would be to break it up into sizable chunks. And from there start, you know, if you're on LinkedIn, for example, start to do a few searches for the specific companies and see if there are any of the marketing managers or the brand managers online. You know, for each, or you can, again, you can take this to AI, and along with adding in any contacts, you can also ask for any press releases or any marketing materials that have gone out in the last 6 months or so. So you can firstly just break it up and then start diving into all of the research around the company and getting those contacts and leads. So you have an understanding of their strategy and exactly where they're going.
Yes.
And
So, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Losh.
No, I think the more you know about your potential sponsor, the easier it will be when you do start to have those conversations with them. So I think the whole process is just to familiarize yourself with the company, their marketing strategy, their values and beliefs, so that you can then, you know, ascertain, is this an aligned partner?
And, you know, we've referenced your article a few times. That's in the show notes. We've shared that here live as well. And you mention and recommend spending about 15 minutes a day engaging with potential partners before reaching out, right? So, and you talked a little bit about that earlier too, I believe. What should that activity actually look like? What does that mean when we're engaging with potential partners before we reach out? What should we be doing there?
I think we touched on it a bit earlier, and it's really just commenting and just getting more involved
Yeah.
with their brand. And so when you do have those conversations, it becomes a lot easier, and the conversation is a lot warmer, and you can reference things a lot easier. Yes, pretty much.
Okay. Okay.
I was actually talking to somebody the other day, and they had a great idea. And they said, what I do is I go onto LinkedIn and I find out who the marketing director is, and I actually buy them small gifts. And I send small gifts to the marketing director. And I thought that was a really brilliant idea, because you don't have to spend a lot of money. But imagine if you got something from somebody who is a content creator. I would think that's going to put you to the top of the list. What do you think, Losh?
I love that idea. Anything that you can do that would warm up the contact would be great. And just kind of put you in there. You suddenly get into their frame of reference. So I think it's a great idea. Yeah. Awesome
Yeah,
idea.
I know this is a little bit, this isn't exactly the topic we're talking about, but as far as that gift giving thing goes, I know that also works really well between hosts and guests. Whether it's you're trying to court a guest in the first place, or you've had the guest on your show and you want to really stand out afterward, that's a great way to do it. I know that one of the very first podcast interviews I did since I started my business, they sent me a coffee mug, and that coffee mug had their podcast logo on it, and it had something on the back of it that said something like, I was a guest on, this show. And I really liked it, and I still have it today. It's over here on one of my tables here that I just look at every day when I come into my studio. So, yeah, that kind of thing, doing things that help you stand out from everybody else who's trying to pitch that sponsor can really go a long way. So I appreciate that.
So, what would be an appropriate gift for a sponsor? This makes me a little bit uneasy, I gotta say. It makes me feel like I'm really trying to kiss their ass. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in first and just say it could be as simple as sending some kind of note with even just some kind of little trinket, even a pen or something with your logo on it, something like that. It does not have to be something that's breaking the bank, in my opinion. Losh, what do you think?
I totally agree. It's a mug, it could be a pen, it could be a cap, it could be a t-shirt. Those general marketing merch items with your logo on it, a little note. It doesn't have to break the bank at all.
And it could be a handwritten note too. That's what a lot of people don't think about anymore.
Yeah.
How many times do you receive something that's handwritten? It's going to get to the top of the pile because you got 300 emails and 5 instant messages, and LinkedIn stuff is a mess. If you send somebody a handwritten note, I love to get them personally. I think that'd be a great idea.
So do I. I absolutely love them.
So I have this picture in my mind of me trying to reach out to the 100 sponsors that you said earlier and sending out 100 handwritten notes, 100 mugs, 100 pens with my logo on it.
Let's, when it comes to gifting, perhaps the best idea would be to look at your top 10. Like, who do you get a response from?
Okay.
And then, do it that way. Narrow it down that way.
Okay.
What you're saying is once you start to warm that relationship, you see there's some camaraderie there, then you would go and start to look at kicking it up a notch.
Okay.
By the way, those little promotional items, the Yiddish term, I believe, is tchotchkes.
Tchotchkes, that's
Yes.
right.
Yes. Sid has a question. Go for it, Sid. And Sid is somebody who has recently really embraced the idea of bringing on sponsors to his podcast. So I'm curious. And also, by the way, live from Costa Rica, I believe, right now. Go for it, Sid.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. I am live from Costa Rica. I am sitting watching the boats move around in the water, and I was not prepared that Costa Rica does not change time. So I'm actually on mountain time, which is totally confused my calendar for the week. But yeah. But yes, as Mark mentioned, I am the niche podcaster you talked about earlier. My podcast is about the people, products, and ideas that shape the future of the office furniture industry. And I have 8 sponsors. all really good. And I think the thing that you said over and over that's really resonating with me is the relationships. I had a relationship of some degree with every one of my sponsors before I ever made the ask, whether I'd had a Zoom call with them or an in-person meeting with them. But and I know my audience really, really well. But the one thing that you said that I actually wanted to comment on was depending on the size of the company that you're targeting, and I do think that targeting sponsors should be a very intentional act. I understand the 50 and 100, but I also think there's a very intentional act here of alignment with your show, alignment with your audience. And, I have 8 sponsors and I could have had 12, but I can't tell you if any more than 12, have a lot more gray hair than I have right now. Um, because it can be a hard thing to manage on the back end. But you mentioned find the marketing director and go build a relationship with the marketing director. I don't disagree with that. However, my biggest success has come from building a relationship with the executive, the CEO, or the owner of the business. And I just want to be clear about this. I'm building the relationship to build a relationship with them before I ever ask them about sponsoring my podcast and becoming part of my sponsorship group, right? So don't be afraid to bypass the marketing director or someone else in order to build a relationship at the highest level, because at the end of the day, that's where the real decision is made, is at the highest level. That's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, I totally agree. And thanks for mentioning that and bringing that in.
Yeah.
And
so-
often I find,
Oh, yeah, go
and
ahead,
often I
Losh.
find at the highest level, if you do build a relationship there, it's a given that the marketing manager is going to execute because of the decision making capabilities. So thanks for mentioning that. I totally agree.
And Losh, let's talk a little bit about once we have made the connections with some of these potential sponsors, and let's talk about what happens when that doesn't work out. In other words, what should happen after the first message if that company doesn't ever respond?
Yeah, I think if the company doesn't respond, you need to use this as data and keep refining your approach. Because remember, cold outreach at the end of the day is a business skill that does improve with consistent repetition. And so as you go through your sponsor list, you are more likely to find more aligned sponsors. So any rejection that happens, just use it as data in your process to find the most aligned sponsors that are going to contribute to the value of your audience best.
But I would imagine I'm projecting here, but I would imagine you wouldn't have any problem with following up, right? I mean, because I think we don't want to give up right away. And I think you agree based on how I'm seeing you react here. So my question then would be, how many follow-ups are reasonable, and how should each one add something useful rather than repeating the same original pitch?
I think it should be limited to about 3. An initial email, there's a second follow-up, and then there's a third. And by the end of the third, I believe you should have a yes or a no. I also think that when you are doing a follow-up, you should steer the discussion into a yes or a no, so that you are able to move on and not kind of be strung on for the next 6 months to a year and still not close.
And I think what you just said is brilliant, because a lot of people don't understand one of the biggest obstacles to sales is ask for the sale. And I think so many people are good at having the small talk, building the relationships, but they never close it because they don't come out and say, ask for the sale. So how do you say to the person who is super nervous, who's never done this before, somebody has this business, this brand has said, yeah, I'm really interested. How do you get them to say yes? And what do you give them? Because somebody might be listening right now, Losh, and has no clue. how to make that happen. They know I need a sponsor. I want to make some money with this. I've built this relationship with this person, but how do I get them into that yes?
I think it's going to, this is a really good question. I think what you need to do is sometimes, a bit of a pilot could work. And what I mean by that is, do you kind of, if they're almost there and you've been building up this relationship, is there something that you just give them for free to close the deal? I'm not talking about an entire campaign, but I'm saying, maybe it's 3 host reads, for example, just to kind of sweeten the deal and to be able to close the process. How can you just provide a little bit of extra value just to close that deal?
And I think Sid has a question for you again, or a comment. Go ahead, Sid.
So sales is hard. Let's be clear. Sales is hard.
Yes.
I have done it for 30 years. Sales is hard. Okay. Cold outreach sucks. There's nothing worse than cold outreach. But I subscribe to the 3 strike rule, right? I'm going to reach out to you 3 times. And this goes for a guest that I'm trying to get on the show as well as a sponsor. I'm going to try to connect with you 3 times. And if you don't respond, then I'm moving on, because let's be clear, no response is a response. It's just a soft no. They didn't respond to you. That means no, they're not interested. So no response is a response. But 3 times. And I honestly got so much to do in my daily life and building a businesses, plural, that I don't have time to chase somebody. If they're interested and you've done your job, then they'll reach out to you. And maybe they come back to you months later and say, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. I totally forgot this. I'd like to talk about this now. But, it's the 3 strike rule for me. And just remember, I can say it again, be very intentional about who you're reaching out to and make sure that the alignment is there. Because if the alignment is there, I believe the conversations will happen.
And totally agree.
Losh, I have 2 more questions. First question for you is, I know I've already shared that we've shared the article in the show notes, but I also want to give you an opportunity. Where can people connect with you, learn more from you?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn. And so I haven't started yet, but I soon will be posting a lot of content for all podcasters looking for sponsors to help guide them through the process. So I think LinkedIn will be the best bet for me.
Awesome. Okay. We will include that link in the show notes as well. And I guess as we wrap up today, I'm curious what you would say. What's one action that you hope a podcaster takes after hearing today's whole conversation?
Oh, that's a great question. I think my intention behind this was starting those conversations. So if you're a podcaster that has been thinking about getting sponsors and you don't know where to start, I'm hoping that this will give you that initial push to do so.
Yeah. So today's process, today's show, today's concept begins with, from what I'm taking away, is understanding the value of your audience, identifying companies that serve that audience, right? Like finding the right fits and researching the right prospects, building familiarity, and making a clear first approach, right? So the goal for this week doesn't have to be for us to be closing a sponsorship deal. If we're going to take anything away, I think a strong first step, in my opinion, could be building a qualified list and beginning a few of these genuine relationships that Losh has encouraged us to do. So Losh, thank you so much for this conversation. Really appreciated the article that you had published over at the Podcast Host, and really appreciate you digging into that today. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, and
Thanks for having me on the show.
You're welcome. And a big shout out to Ralph for finding another fantastic guest for the Podcasting Morning Show. And a reminder that, again, we are back tomorrow covering all things podcast news. And I'm going to tell you right now, one of the big stories I know is going to create a ton of conversation is around Jay Shetty's big podcast deal he just made, where he signed a $100 million contract. And we're going to talk about that, our thoughts about that, and what that means for him, for Netflix, and for his audience. So we will do that tomorrow. And until then, make it a great day, everybody. Take care.